Hello, and welcome to the Week 10 Judge class. My name is John Aratenji.
And I'm Stacy Winchell, and we are level 2 judges from Rochester, Minnesota. And today is review week. So today, after looking at it, we're just going to spend this whole week. We're going to go over the practice tests that we had put up on the Facebook page. And we'll focus a little bit on questions that had some incorrect answers. But we're going to go over the whole thing, and as part of going over it, we're going to go over also what the real question that the question was asking, to kind of give you a little bit of insight as to what the test is going to be looking for. The test the test that we'll have, yeah, it's next week already. It is a multiple choice test. It'll look very, very similar to the test that you took prior to this week. So.
After we're done going over the test, we'll just touch on briefly the classes that you indicated that you'd like us to specifically review. We'll go over those briefly.
We'll kind of see what we have time for.
Yeah.
From there. So, but first, let's go over the test.
Yeah. Oh, and one thing, we're doing this on YouTube Live, so we have a really nice feature. We have our chat. Our live chat. So if you have any questions at all during this class, go ahead and post it in the live chat. One other thing to mention, if you haven't taken the L1 practice test yet, there is a link to it in the description. This class won't be very helpful to you if you haven't taken that yet, per se.
Yeah.
So
if you're watching us right now, pause us. We will wait. We promise.
Yep.
And go ahead and take this test, and then come back, and then finish watching the video.
Yeah. Or if you're, watching this later and you haven't taken the test, regardless, you should try and take the test beforehand and see where you fall. Otherwise, the test won't be worth anything after we go over all the answers.
It's like, here's all the answers to the test. Uh-oh.
So, anyways.
So, spoiler alert, we are now going to start going over the test.
Yep.
So... Alright, question number 1. Archer is attacking with a grizzly bear. Natalie blocks with a hill giant. After blocks, Archer targets the hill giant with a turn to frog. Natalie responds to turn to frog by casting giant growth, also targeting the hill giant. What best describes what happens next? So, I guess first off, I'm going to help kind of go through, like, when I'm looking at an answer on one of these tests, it's really helpful to eliminate answers. Like, first, start kind of reading through and, like, figure, oh, wait, this can't happen correctly. So we have, what did we do? We cast a turn to frog, and then Natalie responded by casting giant growth. So we can eliminate the second and third answers because of how the stack works. You resolve the stack top down, so giant growth has to resolve first. All right, we've already eliminated B and C. They're wrong. All right. So they both, giant growth resolves, giving hill giant +3/+3. Then turn to frog resolves. Okay, that's correct. They all say the same thing. Then hill giant is a 6/6, or hill giant is a 4/4, or hill giant is a 1/1. So this question is really trying to ask you if you understand how layer 7 works. Turn to frog is a power toughness setting effect. Giant growth is a power toughness modifying effect. And that's really all we're working with here. The rest of it is the order and the resolving of the stack. It's here as a confusion, or as a thing that will happen in a real game situation. You will get asked this question. It's like, but this resolves for no layers. This is a layers question, and once you know it's a layers question, it's pretty easy. Turn to frog, base sets to 1/1. Giant growth, then in the following layer, sets it to a 4/4.
This was actually the most selected missed answer.
Ah, okay. So that was okay. So John's informing. So, and that's also an important reason why you want to figure out what's the order in which things are resolving. So important to read the question. So first they cast a turn to frog, then responded to turn to frog by casting giant growth. So you're going to resolve the stack top down. So your giant growth will resolve first.
The key thing here is just responding to. that is, while it's still on the stack, they are casting the spell. And so I think that might have tripped a couple of you guys up.
John has looked at the results from this, and I have not
Yes.
yet. So if I seem like I'm off in a tangent and John brings me back, that's why.
Yeah, but otherwise, yeah, and again, regardless of the order of how they resolve, you're going to apply them in the order in Layer 7. So Power Toughness setting, then modifying.
But correctly, what happens next? Letter D is definitely the answer to this one. So,
And their answers are also randomized.
oh, sorry.
The order where they are. So,
all right, this is me just not knowing how Google Google Docs works here.
All right. So, number 2, Angelo attacks with Thalia Heretic Cathar. Nimesh declares no blocks. What steps does this combat phase consist of? Alright, so Thalia Heretic Cathar, the important thing here is it has first strike. Now, our combat step, or our combat phase always has certain steps. So there's always going to be a beginning of combat step. So we can eliminate any answers that don't start out with that. Then we have a declare attacker step. Then we have a declare blocker step. And then we can either have 1 or 2 combat damage steps. So the important thing to note here is that if when we move to the combat damage step, if there is a creature with first strike or a double strike, then we're going to end up having 2 of them, 2 combat damage steps this turn. If there aren't, we're just going to have 1. But it doesn't matter if there aren't any other creatures out. So like in this case, we only have a first striker. We will still have a normal combat damage step.
Where probably nothing happens, but it does still exist.
Yes. And it's actually just called a combat damage step. The first strike and the normal one, they're both just called combat damage step. But there was only one answer with 2 combat damage steps, and that was the beginning of combat, declare attackers, declare blockers, combat damage step, and end of combat step. I know a couple of you guys got tripped up by I put beginning of combat step, declare attacker step, declare blocker step, first strike combat damage step, and then end of combat step. But regardless of what it was named, there needs to be 2 combat damage steps if we have a creature with first strike or double strike.
And apparently the technical name for the step is the combat damage step. You just have 2 of them.
Yeah. Though that detail isn't important enough for me to try and trip you up on that. But
that's fair.
Yeah, there is only one answer with 2 of them. So if you have the first strike, there are 2 combat damage steps.
All right, so number 3. So Artemis has 4 Darksteel Citadels and a Seat of the Synod in play. Naomi has a Thalia Guardian of Thraben in play. Artemis casts Thoughtcast. What is the total cost of Thoughtcast? So Thoughtcast has affinity for artifacts. It's going to cost 1 less for each artifact you control. And Thalia is, of course, making non-creature spells cost 1 more. The lands are mostly irrelevant. They're mainly there because they're artifact lands, and bringing down the cast of Thoughtcast. So what this question is looking for is it's looking to make sure that you know that when you figure out your total cost, you look at all taxes, then you do your reductions, and then you check Trinisphere. We don't have a Trinisphere, so don't worry about that. Yeah. So you make sure you're doing taxes, then reductions. So Thoughtcast goes up to 6, and then -5 from affinity, going down to a single blue. That's what that question was answering, and I think that one, everybody got that one, right?
Not quite.
Again, John's looked at this and I haven't. This is okay. Not everybody, but yeah, that's what it's looking for. So the other answers, the other most common answer was the blue and 1, and that would be doing things in the opposite order, where you do all the reductions, then you do the taxes, would bring you up to blue and 1. Make sure that you add all the taxes, then do the reductions. That's the important thing to pick up from this question.
Yep. All right. Number 4. Nico controls a Melded Brazella, Voice of Nightmares, a Grizzly Bear, and a 1/1 red Goblin token. Alex casts Sudden Disappearance, targeting Nico. What happens at the beginning of the next end step? So Sudden Disappearance is exiling them until the beginning of the next end step, and then they return them under their owner's control at that point. So we have a token, a just normal Grizzly Bear card, and then we have a melded card. So this is partially checking your knowledge of the melded mechanic.
Which is anything that's a mechanic in standard is fair game on
Yep.
the test.
But basically, it's so let's go through them each. So Grizzly Bear, he'll just return. He's a normal, permanent. He's going to exile himself, and then at the beginning of the next end step, there's nothing keeping him from returning. The 1/1 Goblin token. It is a token. So whenever it goes to exile, as a state-based action, once it's in exile, it will cease to exist.
The really removed from game, not ever coming back zone, if you prefer. But it's gone.
Yep.
Will not be coming back.
And then our other permanent, Brizella, that has meld. So when a permanent with meld is exiled and then returned to the battlefield, it will return as the two separate cards. So that's the answer for that one. You will get Giselle the Broken Blade, Bruno the Fading Light, and Grizzly Bear to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. That one,
and important to note on that one too, which important to note which people. This is a question that could be asked because then it is then past the beginning of your end step. Gisela will not trigger, and so you will have both a Gisela and a Bruna on your opponent's turn to block.
Yep. Because
didn't come up in the question, but I'm seeing it, so I felt like talking about it.
Yeah,
it's all right. All right. Next question, number 5. So, which of these are statuses of permanence? Select all that apply. So there are 4 things. Yeah, go back to that quick. Can click back on that.
Yeah.
I want to see. Okay. So there are a total of 4 statuses of permanence. Tapped, untapped, phased in, phased out, face up, face down, and flipped, unflipped. You don't have to. Flipped, unflipped happens so rarely, and I suppose phased out does too. But anyways, on this particular answer, tapped is one of our statuses. Phased out is a status, deals with phasing. Exiled just means it's in the exile zone, so that's not a status. Face down, that is a status, because face up or face down. And enchanted is not a status, that just merely says that it has an enchantment attached to it. That is not a status. A status is a thing that a permanent has that has nothing to do with any other permanents. Maybe that's the best way to describe a status.
Yeah.
It's it is a description of something about that permanent that has no relation to any other permanents.
Yeah.
Which is just the 4 things.
And those are easy enough. Just try and memorize them if you're able to. So number 6, Anthony attacks with Siege Worm. Naomi blocks with a Traveling Philosopher and an Ascended Law Mage. Anthony declares Siege Worm's damage assignment order to be Traveling Philosopher and then Ascended Law Mage. Before combat damage, Anthony casts Necrobite targeting his Siege Worm. Assuming no other spells are cast, which of the following are legal damage assignments for Siege Worm? Okay, so Siege Worm is a 5/5. It has Trample. We cast Necrobite targeting it, so it will also have Death Touch, and regen is unimportant.
It's important.
To this question.
To this question, it's unimportant.
Yes.
In gameplay, makes Siege Worm win, but continue.
Yes. So Siege Worm is being blocked by a Traveling Philosopher and an Ascended Law Mage, and he said he would deal the damage to the Traveling Philosopher first, and then the Ascended Law Mage. So what are our legal damage assignments? Well, 1 legal damage assignment, we can assign 2 damage to the Traveling Philosopher, then 2 damage to the Ascended Law Mage, and 1 damage to Naomi. Now, another one we can do, we can assign all 5 damage to the Traveling Philosopher. You must assign at least lethal damage to each creature in sequence, but you don't have to...
you can overdeal.
Yeah,
even if it only has 2 toughness.
Yep, even if it only has 2 toughness, you can deal all 5 damage there. And then our other legal one is 1 damage to the Traveling Philosopher, 1 damage to Ascended Law Mage, and 3 damage to Naomi. Simply because...
That's what Trample and Death Touch do together.
Yep, 1 damage is lethal damage with Death Touch. So the Siege Worm is just able to trample over with one damage marked on each of them. Now, the other ones which weren't legal... 2 damage to Traveling Philosopher, 2 damage to Ascended Law Mage, and 0 damage to Naomi. You can't just decide to not deal all of your combat damage. There may be points where this could be relevant. No, you
can't think of any off the top of my head, but yes, you are required to, as a 5/5, deal all 5 damage to something.
Another one which was not legal. 0 damage to Traveling Philosopher, 5 damage to Ascended Law Mage, 0 damage to Naomi. So instead of dealing damage to Traveling Philosopher first, we are going to Ascended Law Mage. No, do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Once you have declared where you're assigning damage first, you are required to deal lethal damage to that thing first.
Yes.
So, yeah, and looking at our responses here, actually it looks like our responses, like I think people thought this was only like a one possible answer here, but yes, all 3 of those that we mentioned are legitimate answers. And yes, even with Trample, you can choose to deal all 5 of your damage to the first creature in the blocker assignment, or let's say that they've got something that you don't actually want to kill the second creature in order. Yeah, you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that covers that.
One thing in there which nobody selected was the 5 damage to Traveling Philosopher, and then 0 damage to the other ones. Like we said, you can assign more than lethal to any creature in the order. You don't have,
as long as you assign to lethal to the first one first. Let's say that we had an example where there was 3, and you can deal lethal to the first one, then deal the rest to the second one. If for some reason you don't want the third creature to live, you can stop anywhere along the way as long as you're dealing lethal in order until you want to stop.
Yes.
So,
all
right.
So question number 7.
All right. So on his turn, Andre attacks with his activated Mutavault. During his post-combat main phase, Andre casts Clone, choosing to copy Mutavault. What best describes Clone's new characteristics as it entered the battlefield? Can I look at what we got for results on that one? Okay. So, important thing to remember on this, whenever you copy something, you are only getting the base characteristics of the card. Nothing else. So, yes, Mutavault itself is currently a 2/2. When you clone it, you have a land that you can pay mana to activate and turn into a 2/2. It has that activated ability because that's part of the base characteristics of the card, but the until end of turn part, if it's currently active, is not part of the base characteristics of the card. So yes, the correct answer is the clone is a land named Mutavault, with obviously Mutavault's abilities.
All right, so question number 8. Amanda attacks with a Dryad Militant. Nori casts Shock, targeting Dryad Militant. Upon resolution, where does Shock go? So Dryad Militants has a replacement effect. If an instant or sorcery would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Shock says deal 2 damage to target creature or player. So what happens when Shock starts resolving? So the very first thing it will do is the text on the card. So Shock deals 2 damage to target creature or player. At this point, Dryad Militant will have 2 damage marked on it. However, creatures being put into the graveyard by damage or -1/-1s or any of that is part of state-based actions. It's one of our state-based actions, which happens after the resolution of the spell. Specifically when players would next get priority. We'll check all that stuff. So Shock is going to finish resolving, but Dryad Militant will still be on the battlefield until we check state-based actions. And the very last thing you do when you're resolving an instant or sorcery is you put it into the graveyard.
And since Dryad Militant is still in play, its replacement effect does apply, and the shock is then exiled.
Yeah.
How did we do on the results on that one? Yep. Okay. This is not an unexpected result. Yeah, it's important to note that damage doesn't kill creatures. State-based effects kill creatures.
Yeah.
So it's important thing to know. It was more important when that was in standard, but I suppose
Yeah.
a little less important now. But you know, it's important to know like the kind of some of the gritty details on that.
Yeah. All right. So number 9. Nina is at 2 life and has a Soul Warden in play. Artemis controls a Purphoros, god of the Forge, and he casts a Grizzly Bear. What happens as Grizzly Bear enters the battlefield? All right.
So this one has several different answers. First things first, knowing that these are triggers means you can eliminate the one that immediately tries to talk about it as a replacement effect. They are not replacement effects, so we get to ignore that answer. So Purphoros's and Soul Warden's triggered abilities will both trigger. Let's see.
This is not working well.
No. So. Let's see. What do we get for answers? Let's look at this. So.
Okay.
What's the difference between? Okay, that's the correct answer. Okay, so this one's important to note that so you put the triggers on the stack in active player, non-active player order. So Artemis has the Purphoros, so his Purphoros trigger goes on the stack first. Then you put the non-active player's triggers, which is Nina. Her Soul Warden trigger is going to go on top of that. I should probably get on the camera again. So this is Soul Warden, this is Purphoros. So you always resolve from the top down. And so the Soul Warden resolves first. Then the Purphoros will resolve. So the Soul Warden resolves first. She goes up to 3. Then Purphoros resolves, and she will go down to 1, but she will be alive.
So the other answer was, well, the other answer we got responses for was that we put it on the stack in active player, non-active player order. However, it had Purphoros' ability resolving first, and then Soul Warden's. So actually backwards of active player, non-active player.
Well, no. You put them on correct. I believe the answer had them putting on correctly, but having them resolve in the wrong order. So it's important to note that the stack resolves top down, first in, last out. Whatever the first thing is that goes onto the stack will be the very last thing to resolve. That's probably the thing to take away from this. First thing on the stack will be the last thing to resolve.
And our other answers were just one was Artemis as the active player gets to choose. That is not correct.
Yeah.
And the other one was they'll be put on the stack in active player, non-active player order. Purphoros' ability will resolve first, followed by Soul Warden's ability, but state-based actions will not check until both of the abilities have resolved.
Which is not correct, because
No.
state-based actions are checked before any ability or spell would try to resolve.
Yes.
All right. So next question, number 10. Anita has Godhead of Awe, Elemental Bond, and 2 Glorious Anthems out. She casts a Tarmogoyf with 3 card types in graveyard. What happens as Tarmogoyf resolves? Okay. So, this one's a little bit complicated, but this is again testing your layer 7. Tarmogoyf is a characteristic defining effect. So with 3 card types, he's a 3/4. However, as he enters the battlefield, Godhead of Awe sets his power toughness, which is 7B, to 1/1, and then Glorious Anthem, which is 7C, will give him, well, you have 2 Glorious Anthems, so each one will both give him +1/+1. So he will enter the battlefield as a 3/3, which will trigger the Elemental Bond, and then the Elemental Bond will resolve.
And Tarmogoyf is, of course, a 3/3 after all that.
Yes.
Let me see here. Okay, so
To be fair, that one was actually rather complicated. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure that there'll be anything quite that complicated on the level 1 test. I think usually the level 1 test is usually like two parts of layer 7.
Yeah.
Usually that's about it. So don't feel bad if you didn't get that one. Just anytime you see any like questions about what its power toughness is, they're probably asking you layers and just build it from the ground up. Characteristic defining effects, then power toughness setting, then pluses and minuses, then counters, then swap.
So one thing to note, had a couple of different answers, but note that Tarmogoyf will enter the battlefield as a 3/3. It doesn't enter the battlefield as a 3/4.
And then get modified.
Yeah, all of the effects will apply. It will never exist on the battlefield as a 3/4. It will just be the 3/3 from the Godhead and the 2 Glorious Anthems.
Yes.
So
like, let's say we didn't have the Glorious Anthems in this example. Like, if it's just Tarmogoyf entering with the Godhead of Awe in play, it enters the battlefield as a 1/1. It doesn't enter as a 3/4 and then Godhead of Awe modifies it to a 1/1. No, it enters as a 1/1.
Yep. So yeah.
All right. Number 11. Amy is casting Nissa's Expedition. She has 4 forests, an Elvish Mystic, and an Eldrazi Scion token. What are the legal ways for her to play this spell? So we have 5 possible answers. The thing that this question was looking for, which when I took this test to make sure we didn't mess anything up, I messed this one up. So, because I looked at it and I'm like, aren't all these legal? No, okay. There's some of them that are not legal because I have to remember them, we all forget things sometimes.
Yeah.
So our first available option, tap 3 forests for mana. Okay, activating mana abilities. Then pay effects and then tap both creatures for Convoke. Okay, perfectly legal. All right, sure. Second one, you can sacrifice the Scion for mana and tap 4 forests for mana. Okay, all of that happens during the activate mana abilities. Scion is a mana ability. You can totally do that. That's your 5 mana. All right, next, tap both creatures for Convoke. Tap 2 forests for mana, then sacrifice the Scion for mana. Can't do that one because you have to activate mana abilities, then pay the cost. Convoke specifically says that. By the way, how I messed this one up is Convoke used to be a little different, and it used to work the way I thought it did.
Yeah.
But how you have to activate mana abilities, then pay for the spell, and Convoke specifically says while you can...
Each creature you tap while casting the spell pays for 1 or 1 mana of that creature's color.
Yes. So, with that, you have to make your mana, then Convoke. And the third answer says Convoke, then make mana, which that doesn't work. So the fourth answer is tap Elvish Mystic and 3 forests for mana, then tap Elvish Mystic for... No, you can't both tap Elvish Mystic for mana and tap it for Convoke. That does not work. But the last answer, tap the Elvish Mystic and 3 forests for mana, then sacrifice the Scion for mana. Again, those are all mana abilities, so you can do all that correctly. Yeah. So, what was our results from that one?
I accidentally closed that tab.
You accidentally killed results.
I killed it.
Were we on 10? I think we were on 10.
I think so.
Okay. So, okay. The third one was the one that everybody chose.
Yeah.
Pop back to the question again so I can... Yeah, so that's the one where it's important to note that when in the steps for casting a spell, which correct steps for casting a spell will come up on the test, that you have to activate mana abilities, then you pay the costs. Important to note.
Yeah.
Because when you know that, that will avoid the situation like that.
Yeah.
So, although Convoke shouldn't be on the test, they usually keep it to stuff that's in Standard.
Yeah. Isn't there... I thought there was some card in Standard which had you, like, tapping creatures as an additional cost. I might be...
I don't remember.
But,
I haven't played much Standard lately, so I'm a little
the Escalate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so if you have an Escalate ability, you cannot
Where if
tap.
the escalate cost is like tap an untapped creature you control.
Yeah, you cannot tap a Scion and then sacrifice a Scion for mana because you have to activate all mana abilities first.
Yes.
Then you pay it.
Yes.
So that's one which is currently in standard.
All right. So number 12. So Arnie is playing against Nero. Arnie controls a Mutavault, which he has turned into a creature until end of turn. He enchants it with Rancor. What happens once Arnie moves to his cleanup step? So what did we have for answers before I dig into this one? All right. Looks like about 50-50 on that. Okay. This is, so based on the answers that we got, it looks like everybody understood that we're going to do this on our end step. That this can happen on the cleanup step. That this can happen on the cleanup step. The important thing to note is Rancor's ability, because it has the word when in it, is a triggered ability. So the correct answer is that it stops being a creature. Rancor is put into the graveyard. Rancor's ability triggers, and then Rancor is returned to Arnie's hand during his cleanup step. One of the few times where players will get priority during the cleanup step. Though because players got priority during cleanup, cleanup will happen again. The other answer that we saw with the most answers, it said that Rancor is a replacement effect. Sure, it feels like a replacement effect, but because if it was a replacement effect, it would have the word instead. Rancor, if it would be put into your graveyard from the back,
yeah,
return it to your hand. But because it says when, it does hang out in your graveyard until that ability resolves.
And tried to fool you, like, oh, do you get priority in the cleanup step? Well, yes, if any state-based actions happened or any triggered abilities triggered.
Which that's cool. They got that as far as our responses went. So. All right. So number 13. This one's kind of a trick question. What were responses before we get into it? So the trick question part of number 13 is that they are all correct. Tarmogoyf's power and toughness is a characteristic defining effect, and as part of that, it is, if there are 3 card types in graveyards right now, its power and toughness is 3/4 in all zones. So exile, stack, graveyard, battlefield, your hand, the anti-zone. If for some reason ends up there, that'd be an expensive ante. Wizards of the Coast does not want you to play for ante, by the way. But yes, this is kind of a trick question because it is 3/4 in all zones.
Yeah.
It used to not be long ago, more than 10 years at this point, I think. But yeah, that is the important thing to know is and this is true of anything that has a star in its power and toughness. That thing is true in all zones. Tarmogoyf just happens to be the most well played one.
All right. So number 14. Norman has 10 cards in her library. Abella casts Startled Awake targeting Norman. What happens when Startled Awake resolves?
Mistakes were made. They changed their name halfway through.
Yeah, Norman became Nicole. Regardless. So what happens when Startled Awake resolves? So Startled Awake wants to put the top 13 cards of Norman's library into his graveyard. And Norman only has 10 cards. So one of the options...
Let's see results.
Yeah.
All right.
It looks like...
All right, good.
Everyone so far got this right. But for those of you who may take the test after this class is recorded, so it can still resolve. There's no problem with it resolving. So they put the top 10 cards into the graveyard. They do not lose a life for each extra card, which should have been put in the graveyard. That's something like Hearthstone E.
Yeah, it doesn't exist in Magic.
Yeah.
If
they don't lose the game right away. There's no problem with trying to put cards from your library into your graveyard when you don't have any in your library.
It only becomes a problem when you try and draw a card and you can't because your library is empty. That is what actually makes you lose
Yeah.
the game.
And you also don't lose at the end of the game during the end of the turn during the cleanup step.
For not having cards in your
You
library.
just lose the next time you need to draw a card
And can't.
and then when state-based actions are checked, you will lose the game.
But yeah. All right. So number 15. So Adam and Nancy are playing against each other at FNM when time in the round is called. Wanting to avoid a draw, Adam offers to roll a die to determine a winner, and John's bowing his head because this. Let's face it, this is the one that as judges we feel bad about, but we still have to do. Bottom line, I think I saw in the practice the results. I think so. You may not want to, but this, one of the things that you're doing as a judge is you're enforcing policy. You have to DQ both these players.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good. You may not like it, but you have to be able to do it.
Yep. It doesn't matter that this is Adam's first FNM, and it doesn't matter that like Nancy only just accepted the Adam's offer to roll a die. They're both at fault here, and they both get a disqualification.
The important thing is, make sure you tell them why.
Yeah.
I mean, the major reason why, especially like the rolling a die, is because games of Magic need to be decided by playing Magic. Wizards already has enough issues in some parts of the world, and matter of fact, even some parts of the U.S., convincing local authorities that this is not gambling. And if you're not finishing games of Magic by playing Magic, it erodes that defense that they have. So that's kind of the big world reason why that they can't do that. It also, it also disrupts the integrity of the tournament too. If people aren't playing Magic to determine their games of Magic, it leads to awkward things. So, anything else you want to say in there?
Random aside, I saw on one of the forums that a store was like, no draws. If it gets to end of turns, roll a die. So that store owner is quite possibly going to lose his sanctioning status.
I mean,
it's a major problem. Wizards takes it extremely seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I also heard of another store. I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah.
It's not relevant for this. But I heard of a store with an issue with how they handled their pre-release this weekend too. So, golden rule, new current rule of judging in the era of social media. Don't have a Reddit post created because of you. Personal goals.
Yeah.
So, all right. Next question. What is the minimum round time for sanctioned events? This one, it's in there. This is in the MTR. It's kind of buried in there. We went over it. This is a question that can come up on the test. The minimum number of minutes for a round is 40 minutes. There is a minimum. It's 40 minutes. The exception to that is if you are playing in what they consider a premier event. Premier events have a little bit tighter restrictions. They are required to be exactly 50 minutes. But yes, for your normal FNM, if your tournament organizer only wants to run 40-minute rounds, he is well within his right. 39 minutes? No. 40 minutes? Fine.
If you want to maybe avoid a question you can get wrong, just memorize the minimum round times for this, for drafting, like deck building and construction for sealed, because it can come up. It has come up on tests for me. So, yeah.
All right, number 17. So during FNM, Armando is playing against Numok. That's a name. Armando casts Coastal Discovery and draws 3 cards instead of 2. A couple of turns later, he realizes he has drawn too many cards. What is the most appropriate remedy? What were the... Sorry, go back to the...
Okay.
Okay, and then the other one. So our two major answers... One is the competitive fix, and one is the regular REL fix. So what I will say is the important thing to remember, and this is going to be true of your policy question.
Yeah. This is a competitive fix.
Oh.
So basically,
what are you talking?
You both agreed. Everyone who answered agreed that Armando should take a random card from hand, but the difference was where we should put it. So the correct answer is we're going to take a random card from hand and put it on top of his library. Because for all we know, like that's a card he's had from turn 1 and it has shaped every play decision he has made since then.
And we don't want to take that away from him at regular
Yeah.
REL.
So what we're going to have him do is put it on top of his library. Now, there are other circumstances where we shuffle things into libraries. This is not one of them.
Yes. Basically, drawing extra cards at regular REL. Now, this has also including the caveat that you assume he's not cheating.
Yes.
All of these questions are, you're sure this was an honest mistake kind of deal. But you don't want to punish him too severely. Like it's a mistake. It's a deal, but you don't want to punish him too harshly for that.
Yeah.
What was the other yes, you don't want it to be shuffled away. That was our other most common answer that we had. You don't want it to be shuffled away. You want it to be, you just want him to redraw that card on the next time he would draw a card.
Yeah. Because just card advantage is beneficial.
It's beneficial. It is a thing that is a thing that exists in Magic. So you want people to have the right number of cards. The competitive answer fix was you have Armando reveal his hand, Numog selects a card to shuffle him back into his library, and remind Armando to play more carefully if that solution hasn't already reminded him to play more carefully. That is the competitive REL fix. We didn't have any. Nobody chose that one, so that's good.
And another thing to note, another option was it's too late to apply a remedy. Which it is not too late to apply a remedy. The jar gives us specific permission to always fix errors relating to forgetting to discard a card, drawing too many cards, drawing too few cards. So it doesn't matter if it's 20 turns later. If they both agree that this happened,
we can fix it.
Yeah,
and this is how you fix it.
Yep.
The important thing where the being too late to fix a problem usually involves a game rules problem. You fix anything that's illegal, and then you just play on.
Yeah.
Which I don't remember if we had a question about that in here, if that was from the review test last week. So.
We do have one in here.
All right, so I'm gonna pause on my thought and we'll move on. All right, so number 18. During a standard format FNM run without deck lists, Eileen is playing against Nevin when she realized she's been playing with a 58-card deck. What is the appropriate fix to the situation? Most people chose the correct answer, and that's choosing to add 2 basic lands of her choice. This is regular REL, so you don't issue a game loss or anything. You just fix it and play on.
Yeah.
That's all you do here. It's not a serious problem, so you're not going to disqualify. You're going to limit it to basic lands, because it is potential for abuse, I guess. Even though this is somebody running at an FNM, so there's usually less on the line at an FNM unless you're at a more competitive store.
It could just be really valuable to them. Even if they aren't purposely cheating, if this was an honest accident. Oh my god, after playing 2 rounds, I realized that this room is full of
blue-based control decks.
Yeah, blue-based control decks.
I need some more discard spells.
Yeah.
And that's why you have them add basic lands.
Yeah.
Now, if you're playing limited, they can just add anything from their sideboard.
Yes.
That is the difference. And honestly, at regular REL, because of continuous construction, they can modify their main deck. For limited, you can modify your main deck anyway. But all right. Number 19. Alexis is playing against Natalie at FNM. Alexis controls a Grizzly Bear and a Glorious Anthem, and Natalie has a Traveling Philosopher. Alexis attacks with her Grizzly Bear. Natalie blocks with her Traveling Philosopher. After combat damage is dealt, Grizzly Bear and Traveling Philosopher are both put into their owner's graveyards. Alexis passes the turn. Natalie draws her card before they realize Alexis's Grizzly Bear shouldn't have died. What is the most appropriate remedy? Okay, good. Looks like everyone got this correct. We're going to rewind. Very little has happened. All we've had happen, really, is a card draw. And since that's all that happened, we're going to rewind to the point where Alexis mistakenly put the Grizzly Bear into their graveyard, fix that, and then have players plan from here. So we're going to take a random card from Natalie's hand, put it back on top, even if it's only going to be temporarily. go back, put the Grizzly Bears back in play. Since nothing else has happened, that's the world's easiest rewind.
Yeah.
And then play on from there. Other answers. There is no remedy due to the damaged game state. Issue a game loss. Well, one, this is regular REL. Don't hand out game losses. Two, there are fixes.
Yeah.
It's not like there are plenty of far worse situations, which I've given competitive rulings at competitive REL. The one that's coming to my mind, I'm not going to share, but it was ugly. And they wanted me to back that up. The player wanted me to rewind it, and I was like, no. Anyways, continuing on with the test.
We also have disqualify Alexis from the tournament. Obviously, we're not going to do that.
Not a serious problem.
The other option, which was sort of maybe feasible, rewind back to before Alexis attacked and play on from there. We don't want to do this because then suddenly, we can Natalie can decide not to block.
You want to change as little of the game state as possible, and so you're only going to go back to the very moment something illegal happened. So I guess technically in this case, you're going back to just the combat damage step, which is when state-based effects would have put the Grizzly Bear in the graveyard, except that it shouldn't be because it's a 3/3.
Yeah.
So. All right, last but not least, number 20. During a modern format FNM, Abdi controls a Sin Prodder. He draws for his turn, then realizes he missed his upkeep trigger. What is the best remedy? So, several options here. What is the most common result?
Looks like we got it right.
All right, cool, good. The two most common answers are put the ability on the stack now. Very little has happened since we missed it. The other one is the competitive answer is Abdi has missed this trigger. Abdi's opponent has the option to, if they choose, to put the ability on the stack now, or what? No, the other has to be the other one. Neither of those is the correct competitive answer anyway. So because it's just a missed trigger. It's not a zone change trigger. So never mind. The competitive answer the competitive answer isn't on there anyway. Though that is a thing that you will see in these policy things. You will see both the regular REL answer and the competitive answer both as options, and it's important to note that for the level 1 test, you will always be talking about Friday Night Magic.
Yeah.
So two of the answers is there is no fix for this. Issue a game loss. That's a very, very old ruling.
And the other one is there is no remedy. Have the players continue playing. It hasn't gone far enough that this would be disruptive to the game state.
Now, if it's a missed trigger, let's say he missed his trigger, and then he goes to do the trigger on the next turn, and then realizes that, I forgot this trigger last turn. My general rule of thumb is a turn. If it's been more than a turn, it's too late, even at regular REL.
Yeah.
So.
All right, so we had some requests for just going over stuff.
Let's look at the one that the most has state-based actions. Okay. So, can you just pull up the thing for the state-based actions? That'd probably be easiest. If I remember, while he's pulling that up, the big things to remember state-based actions, they're going to involve permanents going to the graveyard through various means, players winning or losing the game through various means. There's a third one. Things enchanting things that they're not, things attached to things that they can't be attached to. So we'll go through the whole list. So go ahead. I've been talking a lot today.
So one thing, so state-based actions, like what are they? Well, state-based actions are just things we're going to check each time before a player gets priority to make sure the game is, kept clean. We're doing everything we need to do. So we're going to, check if anything should be dying, players or creatures or planeswalkers. We're going to check, for legend rule or planeswalker rule, we're going to check if enchantments should be going to the graveyard. We're going to check if, tokens cease to exist. So we're gonna check all these things. each time, just to make sure that the game is functioning right. Because, like, without state-based actions, if a creature had 6 damage marked on it, and it was like a 2/2, it would never go away. So what we're doing is we're cleaning up the board
That's a good way to think about
before cleaning up the game before players get priority. We're tidying it up before we hand someone priority.
Now, it's important to note that you only check state-based effects when players get priority. Which I think we had when we did this week, we had a question where there was a Morrow that went to 0 toughness as you were casting the spell, but was still available for you to sacrifice as part of the casting of the spell.
Yeah.
And it's important to note that state-based effects are not checked in the middle of resolving a spell. They are only checked when players receive priority, which is typically right after something resolves. Another good example is, let's say I cast, what's the name of that? Let's say I cast Corrupt targeting John. And John casts Misdirect and changes the target of Corrupt to me. And I'm at 3 life and I have 6 swamps. Corrupt's text is it deals damage equal to the number of swamps you control, target creature or player, you gain that much life. That's what Corrupt's text is. And so Corrupt goes to resolve. You do the things in order, so I take 6 damage and go to -3, but then I gain that much life and go back up to 3. Yes, I was at 0 or less life, but state-based effects aren't checked until after Corrupt resolves, and so I don't actually lose the game, even though I was at 0 life for a weird moment in time.
Yeah, so like we're not gonna clean while we're doing something. Like we're gonna
That's
wait.
a good,
We're gonna
I
wait
like
to
that.
clean up until
We're
you know,
in between things.
Yeah, we're in between things. So that's what state-based actions are. So the list of specific state-based actions. Most of these are intuitive if you can remember the categories. But if a player has 0 or less life, he or she loses a game. If a player attempted to draw a card from an empty library since the last time state-based actions were checked, he or she loses a game. If a player has 10 or more poison counters, he or she loses the game. So that's players losing the game. Tokens disappearing. If a token is phased out or is in a zone other than the battlefield, it ceases to exist. If a copy of a spell is in a zone other than the stack, it ceases to exist. If a copy of a card is any zone other than the stack or the battlefield, it ceases to exist. So that's things disappearing.
That's copies and tokens.
Yeah.
Things that aren't real cards. That's a good way to put it.
Then we have creatures dying. If a creature has toughness greater than 0 and the total damage marked on it is greater than or... Okay, so if a creature has lethal damage marked on it, which is damage greater than or equal to its toughness.
Or from a thing with Death Touch.
Yep. It's put into its owner's graveyard.
Oh, those are 2 separate state-based.
Yeah.
That's my bad.
Sorry. So if it has lethal damage marked on it, it is destroyed. Regeneration can replace this effect. If a creature has toughness greater than 0 and has been dealt damage by a source with Death Touch since the last time state-based actions were checked, that creature is destroyed. Regeneration can replace this effect. So there's the Death Touch.
Yeah.
If a creature has toughness 0 or less, it's put into its owner's graveyard. Regeneration can't replace this effect.
It's important to note that because that effect does not actually destroy a creature, it just puts it into its owner's graveyard.
Yes.
Which means it also bypasses indestructible.
Yep. And also, sort of in this vein, is if a planeswalker has loyalty 0, it's put into its owner's graveyard. Again, something dying when we check state-based actions.
Next section is kind of the legend rule, planeswalker rule.
World rule as well. If a player controls 2 or more planeswalkers that share a planeswalker type, that player chooses one of them, and the rest are put into the graveyard. This is called the Planeswalker Uniqueness Rule. If a player controls 2 or more legendary permanents with the same name, that player chooses one of them, and the rest are put into their owner's graveyards. This is called the legend rule.
I'm gonna pause here. It's important to note that with Planeswalkers, you can have one of each type. So you can't both have a Jace the Mind Sculptor and a Jace Architect of Thought, because those are the first two Jaces I thought of. You get one, even though they have different names. However, you most certainly can have a Thalia Heretic Cathar and Thalia Guardian of Thraben in play at the same time. They are not Planeswalkers, they are creatures, and they do not have the same exact name.
Yes.
That is the best way to tell the difference between those two. I mean, there was a cardboard crack recently that explained that flavor fail.
And also, if 2 or more permanents have the super type world, all except the one that had...
Yes.
All except for the newest one are put into their owner's graveyards. In the event of a tie for the shortest amount of time, all are put into their owner's graveyard. And that's the world rule. It shouldn't really come up.
It doesn't usually come up. It only comes up if you're playing Legacy, because there are a few things in Legacy that have the world rule. The Abyss is a world enchantment. Concordant Crossroads is a world enchantment. There's supposed to be one more that I always think of, but it can come up.
So the next refer to things being equipped. Or attached, I should say. So if an aura is attached to an illegal object or player, or is not attached to an object or player, that aura is put into the graveyard. If an equipment or fortification is attached to an illegal permanent, it becomes unattached from that permanent, but it stays on the battlefield because it's an equipment. If a creature is attached to an object or player, it becomes unattached and remains on the battlefield. Similarly, if a permanent that is neither an aura, an enchantment, or a fortification is attached to a object or player, it becomes unattached and remains on the battlefield. So that's all referring to attached. Basically, if it's not attached or attached to something illegal, we're going to have it fall off. Or it's a creature or something which can't be attached, period.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have it fall off, and for auras, that goes to the graveyard. For everything else, it stays on the battlefield.
Yes.
And, oh yeah, one more thing we have is...
the one thing that happens the most often is counters.
Yeah, counters. If a permanent has +1/+1 and -1/-1 counters on it, you're going to remove an equal number of both until only one type is remaining. So if you have 3 +1/+1s and then it gets 2 -1/-1s, we're going to remove 2 of each type of counter, so it will be left with just 1 +1/+1. And the other thing is, if a permanent with an ability that says it can't have more than n counters of a certain kind on it has more than n counters of that kind on it, all but n of those counters are removed from it.
So if a permanent says it can only have 7 +1/+1 counters on it, and somehow it now has, and you double it, and somehow it now has 14, as a state-based effect, it is brought down to 7.
Yes.
This kind of goes. The last ones are multiplayer, and specialty formats.
We don't need to worry about those. The only thing to mention are a 2-headed giant.
I would also mention Commander.
It's not going to be on the test.
All right.
2-headed giant. It also has some rules relating to players dying. If a team has 0 or less life, that team loses a game. And if a team has 15 or more poison counters, notice it's 15, not 10 for 2-headed giant, that team loses a game.
You know, I want to talk about Commander. The only other one in a Commander game, the only other state-based effect, a player that's been dealt 21 or more damage, combat damage, by a player's commander loses the game. Just one extra rule. I feel like the Commander thing is important to know. Not necessarily for the test, like John said, they're not going to probably ask you Commander questions on the test, but Commander is a casual format. Players like to play Commander. So it's something that as a level 1 judge, you're more likely to run into.
Hey, I think we got another response.
Hey, cool.
Sweet.
All right, so we just went over
state-based actions. Are you all right with this running a little long?
I can I could probably go till about. I'd feel good until about 8. So we probably got about half an hour.
Okay. So that way we'll just keep going over things. If you need to like leave us and then watch the rest of the video later, you're free to, of course.
All right. So interaction of continuous effects. All right. Layers. So honestly, we're gonna skip to layer 7 because that is the layer that will be on the test. The other layers are important. Don't get me wrong. If you want to know more about those, go to our week 4 and watch that video where we go through all of it. But we're going to do a quick go over of layer 7. So,
all right. So, layer 7 is how we apply power toughness modifications. How we determine a creature's power toughness when there are multiple effects trying to do things to it. An important thing to note is it doesn't matter what order the effects were cast in or things enter the battlefield or whatnot.
Mostly. If things happen in the same layer, like let's say I play a giant growth and he casts a last gasp, those apply in the same layer. And their timestamp shouldn't matter because it should just be the order that they resolved in. But if both things happen in the same layer, then we look at timestamp.
Yes.
But if things are happening in different layers, we don't care about timestamp.
All right, so layer 7...
broken into 5 parts.
Yeah. So the very first thing we do is look if the creature has a characteristic defining ability. So these are cards like Marrow,
Tarmogoyf.
Tarmogoyf
is by far the most common one.
That one green werewolf, whose name I can't remember.
From current standard, right?
Yeah.
Sage of Ancient Hours.
Yeah, Sage of Ancient Hours. These have star, or they have at least 1 star in the bottom.
Yeah. That is how you can tell if your card will have a characteristic defining effect. It will have a star in one of the 2 spots, if not both.
And the big thing is that like that goes first of all before any effects which say like this becomes a 1/1. We're gonna apply that first, and then we'll set it to a 1/1 or a 0/2 or whatever we're exactly setting it to.
So first characteristic defining effect. Then you follow it up with power toughness setting, like John said. If something says set it to a 1/1, like Turn to Frog in one of our test questions, target creature becomes a 1/1. Okay. Setting its base power and toughness. I like to use Mirror Entity because I play the card in Modern, in my Tier 2 Modern deck. But yeah, Mirror Entity just says, it's pay X, creatures you control get base power and toughness X until end of turn. Anything that sets a power and toughness to a specific number, that's what goes second.
Then what goes third, we have any modifying effects. So like +3/+3 or -1/-1. Anything that is just like plus or minus a certain amount, we're gonna apply that here.
Yeah.
So note,
7C.
If I cast 12 giant growths targeting my dude, give him 24. I can't math.
3 times 12
it doesn't
36.
Matter. 36 plus 36, and then my opponent casts Sudden Spoiling, saying creatures target player controls become 0/2 until end of turn.
Assuming we start with a Grizzly Bear, I've just taken 2 power off your dude. Is all I've done. You still have 34 power, or still have 36 power.
The power toughness setting is going to apply first, and then we will apply the modifying, regardless of the order in which those spells were cast.
Yes.
So we do
little counterintuitive, but that's how it works.
Setting, then modifying. The next thing we do is +1/+1 or -1/-1 counters, or any counters like that.
Any counters.
Even if they're weird old ones.
We'll ignore those for now.
Yeah.
But yeah, +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters. Actually, the Fabricate guys that just came out in Kaladesh.
Oh,
For those of you who played Kaladesh pre-release this weekend, yeah, those guys that have Fabricate, assuming that you put those counters on the guy, you have, and my mind just, those are counters. So those go layer 7D. So
they won't really necessarily interact with 7C very often, if ever. But again, they occur after a power toughness setting.
Yes.
So if I have a 2/2 with 2+1/+1 counters on it, and then you turn it into a 1/1 until end of turn.
Turn to frog again.
Yeah. Now it's going to be a 1/1 with 2+1/+1 counters on it.
Yeah.
And that's fairly intuitive. Most people get that.
Yeah.
Because they're physically there. But yeah, that will apply after setting effects. But
so setting, then power toughness modifying, then counters, which is where we're at.
yeah. But there's one last thing which will apply after counters, which is power toughness switching. So basically, if we're not talking about like switching this creature's power toughness with that creature's, we're talking specifically
We're
about
switching this particular creature's power and toughness.
yeah, we're
So
swapping them back and forth.
Wandering Fumarole isn't standard. That's the kind of swap we're talking about.
Yeah.
It is a 1/4. It has an activated ability for 0. You can switch its power toughness. It can change from a 1/4 to a 4/1. This is where it also can get a little counterintuitive because people, I have been asked this question since Fumarole came out. People are like, okay, I attack with this. I'm going to make it a 4/1, and then I'm going to cast a red spell to give it +3/+0. Well, you have a 4/4. You don't have a 7/1. Because layers. And again, that one's a little counterintuitive. And that's one of the things with layers. Layers can be a little counterintuitive. Always go from the bottom up. Figure out what's your characteristic defining effect. What is power toughness setting? What is power toughness modifying? Counters, and then what is and then the swap. Very, very important. So John's going on there. All right.
So
that like I said, that's the important things from the layers section.
yeah,
Because that's layer 7. Layers, all 5 parts of layer 7 can be on the level 1 test. So, what else do you want to go over? Let's see.
people didn't specifically ask for this, but I just want to touch on it really briefly. Copy effects, we had some trouble in the quiz with that.
All right.
Just
I'll let you go.
what is written on the card. That's what you get. It doesn't matter if there are any crazy abilities applying to it, enchantments, vehicles turned into creatures, turned into artifacts. It doesn't matter what's going on. What's written on the card, unless the card itself has a copy effect. So like if you cast a clone copying a grizzly bear, and then you cast another, or
Bad example.
if you cast a Sakashima the Imposter copying a grizzly bear,
and then I cast a clone copying your Sakashima the Imposter, my clone, because of the copy effect, is Sakashima the Imposter copying Grizzly Bear.
yes, because Sakashima has some additional abilities added. Any copies of a copy get any additional abilities added as part of the copy effect.
But honestly, for the level 1 test, just make sure you know a copy effect is base characteristics of the card. So
Yes.
the text on what the card says base. Not any like mutable, not anything that it's currently activated, nothing else, just base card.
Yep.
What is this if I were to put it into play right now with nothing going on?
99% of the time, you can just look up the Oracle text on your phone, set your phone on your clone, and it will be the right state.
No, that's pretty accurate.
All right. So other things people have asked us to talk
So
about.
you did state-based.
Uh,
Trigger and replacement effects. Okay. We can do this relatively quickly. I know that section kind of got a little bit wordy when we did it the first time. Replacement effects, somewhere in that line of text, will have the word instead. Instead means you're replacing whatever you were to do with this card normally by doing whatever this line of text says. So like Rest in Peace says, if a card would go to a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. It has the word instead. That's a replacement effect.
I know we got into a whole bunch of like crazy situations of like replacement effects, modifying each other and whatnot. Don't worry about any of that for the level 1 test.
True story.
All you need to know is that if it says like instead do this, that is a replacement effect. If it does not say the words when, whenever, or at, it is.
If it says the words when, whenever,
yeah.
or
If
at.
it says when, whenever, or at, it is a triggered ability. If it says like instead, or like enters the battlefield as, or enters the battlefield with, or whatnot, that's
Those
a
are
replacement effect.
And the main difference between a replacement effect and a triggered effect, replacement effects just happen. They modify an event that's already happening, and they just modify it. They just do it. Triggered abilities show up and go on the stack, can be responded to, and then resolve. Replacement effects are something that are set up ahead of time or are just part of a card and will modify the event and not use the stack.
Yeah.
What
were... There was something with a triggered ability, I know.
Rancor?
We did well on the Rancor.
Yeah, so like everybody did well on the Rancor question, so...
I thought there was one other...
Oh, you said we had new responses. We should check new responses really quick, too, as long as we're paused.
Again, a great way to just cheat an extra point, which you otherwise would have gotten wrong. Memorizing the round times.
Actually, it was the new person. The newest responses that we have, we're getting it right. So I think the newest one was the right one too. Now.
That one.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
Let's just keep going over what people had asked us to go over. So what the last two at the end here. So the jar and what's the very last one? That should be the MTR, right?
Yeah.
The MTR is hard to go over. The most important things are kind of the things we tried to bring up on the review test. So it's round timers, or minimum round times, minimum number of players for sanctioning an event. That is an important one to know. You need 8 players to sanction a Magic event.
And 3 rounds.
And minimum of 3 rounds. Minimum of 4 teams if you're doing 2-headed, or team constructed where you have 3 players on a team, or team. I guess they don't really. I don't know, they do team sealed still, but trying to think if those are the big ones. The deck construction times for limited and 2-headed giants. Those are kind of the big important ones to hit there. I'm trying to go over the MTR really quick because I think going over the jar is more important.
The big thing with the MTR, if you want, everything we are covering, we think is really important, just go over Section 2 and Section 10 and Appendix B.
Yes.
Those are the 3 big ones.
Yeah, that'll cover everything. That honestly, those are the 3 sections that we went over in our video from that week, which was week 10.
It covers 90% of what's going to be relevant to you as a judge or on the test. So, yeah, just go over those, and the times I was talking about are available in Appendix B.
All right, and then last thing that we'll do, just check my time here. Yeah, okay, we're okay. We're cruising to finish by 9, or 8. So all right, so the last thing we'll go over then is the jar. So, judging a regular REL, I would say the basic part of that document is that most of the time you're going to the general rules of the jar, and this was given to me by one of the other level 2s in Minnesota here, is you're going to fix it if you can. If you can't, you play on. If it's a serious problem, you're probably DQing somebody. Those are the 3 things, because most things aren't a serious problem. Most things are like, okay, play more carefully, fix it if we can. If we can't, we can't. But that's the way it is. Like, let's do serious problems first. Let's get that out of the way. I know that's at the bottom of the document, but okay.
Oh, and I like to go over categories. That's the thing I like to do. Just like we have 3 categories in the jar of situations. We have the serious problems. We have general. Serious problems are like major, destroy the integrity of your tournament or make people unsafe. General unwanted behaviors is our next category. And it's things which are outside of like play mistakes. They're things in the tournament which make the tournament go less smoothly. And then we have common issues, which are just like play mistakes.
And the common issues are the ones you're going to see the most often.
Yeah.
Which I'm going to spend the most time on. That's why I'm going to get serious problems out of the way first. So, serious problems. Aggressive, violent, harassing, abusive behavior. Flipping the table, aggressive name calling, loud talking, things like that. It's pretty obvious. Intentionally and knowingly breaking a rule, or letting an opponent break a rule, or lying in order to gain an advantage. That's cheating. Cheating's bad. Cheating gets you DQ'd. Determining the match outcomes by incentive, coercion, or things other than playing Magic, such as rolling a die. Play Magic to determine Magic.
Also, gambling on any part of the tournament on that section.
No fantasy Magic.
Yeah.
And then the last one on serious problems is theft. This includes like replacing a card in a draft with one from your binder. It's like, honestly, taking a second card from a pack. Like if you want your draft pick, but you also want the money card. Like let's say you open a Kaladesh Invention, and you want that and the rare. Now you are allowed to drop from the tournament at any time, so you can drop from the tournament right there, and then you're not stealing anything. You are currently in possession of the cards you are currently holding. But if you take 2 picks from that pack, you're stealing. That's theft. Yeah. And it should be dealt with appropriately. All of those things are a DQ. Explain to them, if you end up having to do that, explain to them why. Also let them know your decision's final. They don't have to be necessarily removed from the venue. That is up to the TO, or whoever, the store employee, in the case of most FNMs, I would say.
But also let them know that the judge program would like to hear their side of the story. And there's a whole disqualification report. If you get to that point, contact one of us, contact your regional coordinator, contact some higher level judge, 2 or higher, which you trust.
Yes. That covers serious problems.
Those
will hardly ever happen.
All right. So general unwanted behaviors. These are things that make the tournament run less smoothly and aren't like in-game mistakes. So a player is taking unreasonable amounts of time, sideboarding, or making play decisions. They're slow playing. They're not shuffling adequately, like they're just doing a pile shuffle.
By the way, fun fact that just got added to the MTR, probably won't be on the test because it just got added to the MTR. You are now currently only allowed 1 pile shuffle per randomization. So you're shuffling up to get started. You can pile shuffle once because the reason they allow that is because most people, when they pile shuffle, also count when they pile shuffle to make sure they have 60 cards or 40 cards, depending on what you're playing. But you're allowed to pile shuffle once. After that, it's slow play. And I like this change. It makes calling a slow play much, much easier.
But yeah, they take unreasonable amounts of time doing things, slow play, that there's inadequate shuffling.
The MTR does say, sorry, and then I'll let you continue, my bad. The MTR does say a minimum of 3 riffle shuffles is what the minimum is. I highly recommend more than that. But, if you see somebody like pile shuffle, put their cards up, and then present, that is what inadequate shuffling.
Yeah.
All right, continue.
Asking for or providing strategic advice during a match or draft, outside assistance, basically, or tardiness. Like, all these things cause problems, which we don't want to have to deal with. So, general unwanted behaviors, we're going to educate them about this. And we have the option with these, especially to reinforce this with more stern penalties if they keep doing this over and over. Like, they're constantly, 3 minutes late to the match for no good reason.
You've warned them that pile shuffling is not enough, and they keep refusing to riffle shuffle. They constantly ask, "Hey, what should I do in this situation?" These things.
So we can warn them, "Hey, the next time you do this, we're gonna apply a game loss." And then if they continue to do it, we can apply a game loss. General unwanted behaviors, we want them to stop doing these things. So yeah, we can sort of upgrade it if that helps.
Warn first, then upgrade to game loss.
Yeah.
However, what I would say there is on the level 1 test, you're probably, if one of these things comes up, unless it says they've done it multiple times, you're just going to give them a warning and warn them that continuing to do this can result in a game loss.
Yeah.
So then well, it's the first section of the document, but we're doing this in the reverse order. Common issues. These are the things that you are much more likely to run into, and by proxy, they're also the things you are much more likely to see on the level 1 test. So a player forgets a triggered ability, something that uses when, whenever, or at. Usually it has these at the start of the abilities text. These abilities are considered missed if the player did not acknowledge the ability in any way at the point that it required choices or had a visible in-game effect. If the ability includes the word may, you assume the player chose not to perform it. Otherwise, use your judgment to decide if putting the trigger on the stack now would be too disruptive. Also figure out how long it's been too. My general rule of thumb, if it's been more than a turn sequence, it's too late. So you don't add it to the stack if significant decisions have been made based on the effect not happening. Unlike other illegal actions, which must be pointed out by an opponent if they notice them, players may choose whether or not to point out their opponent's mistriggers. I am not required to point out John's mistriggers. I am required to point out if he didn't draw a card for the turn. I am required to point out if he should have gained life off of lifelink. That's not a trigger, that's just how lifelink works. But if he forgets his Dark Confidant trigger, that's on him, that's not on me. I do not have to remind him of mistriggers.
So the really important thing here for the level 1 test, they're going to make it clear that a trigger has been missed. Now, in real life, we have to worry a little bit about, like, when is it actually missed? Well, that's when choices for it needed to be made or it had a visible effect in game. But in the test, it will make it very clear when it's missed.
And actually, I'll go into that a little bit just because it may not be as good for the test, but it's useful for real-world applications, is visible in-game effect or required a choice. Probably the most obvious one is Exalted.
Or Prowess.
Oh yeah, Prowess and Standard. Prowess is an evergreen ability now. So I don't have to announce that I've remembered Prowess until it is relevant to the game state. So I have a Monastery Swift Spear, and I swing, and then John's like, no blocks, and I'm like, well, before damage, Lightning Bolt you. Actually, let's back up. My turn. I'm going to cast 2 Lava Spikes targeting John. Then I'm going to swing with my Monastery Swift Spear. I don't say anything else. I'm not required to. It doesn't have a visible in-game effect yet. Until we go to combat damage. Now, when I go to combat damage, if I say take 3, that's clear that I've remembered my triggers. If I say take 1, now it's clear that I've missed my triggers.
Yep. Yeah, important, visible effects, life loss, life gain, +1/+1 counters, putting tokens on the battlefield, any of that stuff. But regardless, so that's when it becomes missed. So the level 1 test will make it very, very, very clear that an ability has been fixed, and then it's missed, and then it's going to ask you to fix it. So basically, if it has May, they didn't do it. Just assume they chose not to do whatever the May was, and we'll go on.
Also, because this is an evergreen ability, if something tells you to scry and you don't, that is considered a May. All scries are considered Mays.
Yes.
It's assumed that if you didn't scry, you just chose to keep however many of those cards on the top.
Yes.
A little bit of a feel bad, but important to note, scry is always a May. Continue. Sorry.
All right. So if there's a May, they didn't do it. You just act as though they chose not to. If there's not a May, you get to decide right now if it would be too disruptive. If you decide that it wouldn't be too disruptive, then you put it on the stack. There is no choice by players. There technically isn't a time limit, though it does become very disruptive once you get past a turn or so.
The more time that though there's no time limit, the more time that has elapsed, the more disruptive it is by definition.
So, yeah, if there's a May, we don't do it, but otherwise we are going to add it to the stack if we deem it not too disruptive. That's all you need to worry about for missed triggers. And remember when, whenever, or at is triggered.
Yes. Next section in common issues is a player sees a card in a library that he or she shouldn't have seen. You know, I went to draw my card, I drew my card, but then my next two cards flipped off my deck and flipped over. Shouldn't have seen those cards. You just fix it. Shuffle the card scene into the unknown portion of your library, and shuffle it, because you shouldn't know where those cards are. You didn't actually draw them, so we don't treat it like an extra card draw. You just saw something you shouldn't have. We fix it. You shouldn't know what's there. Important to note, if you know the location of any cards, such as like you mulligan to 6 and you know the bottom card of your library because you scribed to the bottom, then you only shuffle the unknown part of the deck, which should be everything but the bottom card then.
Yes. A player accidentally draws or has more cards than he or she was supposed to. So if the identity of the card was known to all players, cards were known to all players, return them to their proper location.
Such as, like, if there was a Courser of Kruphix out and you saw the card draw as well, oh, you should be, you know, this particular card which I saw just goes back on top of your library.
Otherwise, determine how many extra cards have been drawn. Then take that many cards at random from the player's hand and place them on top of the library. Don't shuffle the library after doing this. If the extra cards were drawn while drawing an opening hand, shuffle the extra cards back into the deck instead and allow the player to continue making mulligan decisions. So,
so basically, is this during a... There's a question to ask. Are they mulliganing? If the answer is yes, then you take out the extra card and then you shuffle that card away. If the answer is no, like they're playing the game, they're in the middle of the game and they have too many cards, then you take the extra card away, put it on top, and leave it there. Do not shuffle if they're in mid-game.
So a player, the next section is a player makes an in-game error not mentioned above. This will cover the bulk of errors, and usually the least disruptive option is to leave the game as it is after fixing anything that's currently illegal, like enchantments, enchanting things they can't enchant. If an error involved a player forgetting to draw or discard cards, have them perform the appropriate action now. This never expires.
Yes.
Basically, if a player has more cards in hand than they should have, or not enough cards in hand, if they forgot to draw, we can fix this no matter how long it's been, as long as we can determine that this mistake did happen.
As long as we can verify it.
Yeah.
And honestly, as long as both players can agree, yeah, we think this is what happened, then you're fine.
Yep.
So, as an addendum to this, if the error was caught quickly and rewinding the whole game is relatively easy, then you can do the rewind. From the practice test, there was that pretty simple rewind where you just have to rewind a card draw and put the Grizzly Bear back into play. That's pretty easy. The important thing to note with rewinds is consider every single action that has happened since the illegal action. And the more things that have happened complicate the situation and makes rewinding less appealing. If there were if there were revealed cards because somebody played a combat trick or played a cards out of hand, this makes it awkward. If there is like a fetch land and libraries got shuffled, that makes it more complicated. The more complicated it sounds, the less I will recommend doing a rewind.
Yeah.
Very, very important. If the error was caught quickly and rewinding is relatively easy.
Yeah. And like it says at the very top, usually the least disruptive option is to leave the game as it is after fixing anything currently illegal. If you think you can relatively easily rewind it and fix it, then do so. But if you don't, just go ahead and leave it as it is.
Don't feel bad for leaving it as it is.
Yeah.
The thing that I mentioned earlier, there was a call I'm just remembering where the players were unhappy, where I told them I planned on leaving it as it was. It was a competitive event. They appealed to the head judge, and the head judge backed me up on that because we could not reasonably rewind the situation, even though only realistically 3 things had happened.
Too complicated.
It was just because I'm not going to go into the whole situation because it's not relevant for the review here, but it was extremely, even though it was only 3 things, it was extremely complicated and was not rewindable. So if you're starting to kind of get like the glazed over look in your eyes of like, oh my god, how do I rewind this? Don't.
Yeah, you
Just
don't.
don't.
You don't is how you react.
And don't feel bad.
Yep.
Remind them to play more carefully.
The very last common issue is illegal, insufficient, or another player's card in his or her deck. We went over this on the practice test, well, somewhat. So you remove any cards that shouldn't be in the deck, put back any cards that should, and then add basic lands of the player's choice if the deck is below the format's minimum size limit.
Usually where this comes up most often is like, I put a pacifism on John's creature, we're playing the same color sleeves, he accidentally takes my pacifism to his next match.
Yeah.
He finds it because he draws it in his opening hand, calls the judge. They give me my, he fixes his deck, taking out any cards that he shouldn't have, gives it to me, I put it back into my deck, and then we make sure the cards are of the legal limit, which they were beforehand, so we don't have to do anything else there. But it's important to note that there's no game losses or anything like that involved. It's just he gives me my card back and we play on from here.
Yeah.
Let's say I had gotten into my game. Let's say I'm like a turn or two in because my mulligan decision was easy and so was my opponent's. And I'm like on turn 2 already. So he's gonna give me that card back and I'm gonna just shuffle it into my deck.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So the big thing there is just we're gonna, fix the deck. We're gonna remove cards that shouldn't be in it, put back any cards that should. And then we're going to add basic lands if it's not up to the minimum number of cards.
Up to 40 or 60, depending on your format.
Yeah. So those are the common issues. Triggered abilities, Maze, where we're going to say they didn't do. Otherwise, you add it to the stack now if it's not too disruptive. Player sees a card in a library that he or she shouldn't have seen. We're going to shuffle the card into the unknown portion of the library. A player accidentally draws or has more cards than he or she was supposed to. If the cards were known, we're going to put them back where they should be. If they weren't, we're going to take the appropriate number of random cards from their hand and place them on top of the library. Don't shuffle the library after doing this. Note that if it's during a mulligan, instead we're just going to have them shuffle in the extra cards. A player makes an in-game error not mentioned above. We're going to probably leave it as is after fixing anything that's currently illegal, or we're going to do a simple backup, or if it involves drawing or discarding cards, we're just going to have them perform that now, regardless of how long it's been. If a player has illegal, insufficient, or another player's cards in his or her deck, we're going to have them fix it and then remove cards, put them back in as appropriate, and then add basic lands if it's under the minimum size. So that's our common issues and all the fixes.
And that's going to be the things that are most likely to be on the level 1 test.
Yep.
So.
All
right.
Yeah.
That is the jar. What time do I have? It's 5 after 8. So I think we've covered a lot of the things. By the way, currently winning is steak. That makes me happy. The most important question of them all is what meat choice are we having for Chipotle? So, all right. I guess that's all we have for this week.
Yeah. So this coming Sunday, we have the Rochester Judge Mob. So the Judge Mob is going to be at Games and More in Byron. It'll start at
well, it's going to start at noon.
It'll start at noon.
But if you're testing, we'd prefer if you can come in as early as 11, and we'll be ready for you to be able to get that done before we actually get to playing some Magic.
Yes. So if you scored somewhat low on the practice test, don't worry too much. So I will be in contact with you. We'll work on figuring out a way to make sure that you're confident in the material before before you take the test. And if you end up not feeling confident by the second, that isn't a problem. You can just come, have a good time with judges that day, and then we can figure out another time to test you if you think that is more conducive to your success.
We would rather have you be ready and feel like you're going to pass rather than just like jam a test down your throat that you're not going to be able to pass.
Yeah.
That doesn't help. That doesn't help anyone.
Yep.
So we'd rather have you be ready. So
yeah. Wow. This is our last.
This is it. This is the end of beta. Well, yeah, this is the end of beta right here.
All right. So if you are not on Judge Apps yet, I would highly recommend you get on there. It is
apps.magicjudges.org.
Yes, apps.magicjudges.org. We'll post a link to that in the video description and on the Facebook page. In addition to that, if you're on Facebook, join the Minnesota.
The Rochester.
The Rochester Judge class page if you're not already following us. Otherwise, there's a couple of great groups for judges and potential judges. Minnesota Magic Judges for our state.
And then Magic Judges of the North.
Yeah.
For our region.
Magic Judges USA North, I believe, is the
I forget
full
the
name.
actual name of that one.
Yeah, Magic Judges USA North.
Yeah, which is our region.
Yeah. You can join either of those, and it will keep you in touch with the judge community. As well as Judge Apps has forums and events are constantly going up there. Like we have an application for the Judge Mob. You don't need to fill out the Judge Apps application.
That's more just so that people can see it in Judge Apps.
Yes.
So everybody is invited to a Judge Mob. So.
Yes.
Do we have any chat questions? I know our chat's been really quiet, but I figured
we do not have any chat questions.
All right. Well then, I need to call it a night. So,
but thank you for joining us for the past 10 weeks. This is the first time we're doing this online.
Thank you for being with us with the bumps in the road. Our wonderful learning of our technology, then realizing it was going away, then relearning of technology, then more fighting with technology. So thank you for being there with us, and hopefully we'll see you this Sunday. One last time, I am Stacy Winchell.
I am John Aratinji, and thank you for joining us.